So I wanted to set up kind of the requirements around systems if you're building multiple offices or, a larger system for your dental offices. And, this is kind of the what we do when we sit down and design a system is kind of go over the entire organization's requirements, list them out, and then we pilot a program and then get the feedback from everyone and then try to make improvements on those, and then try to dial into our final system as much as possible. And always there's a balancing act between, what one particular office wants or is used to and larger requirements. So a lot of systems are developed over time and have gone through multiple versions. And if you think that your final version is the final version, then you'll become stagnant and you won't ever improve. So super important to take feedback from all of the stakeholders and just come up with better and better versions. Now, at some point in any system, there becomes a decision on, are we reducing, are we trying to build in protocols for a situation that happens so infrequently that the effort to implement this one exception to the rule is going to be way more than just dealing with that one-off situation occasionally, okay? And this is something that we've thought about from the accounts receivable side to scheduling to which insurances that we're going to take. And unfortunately, the tendency with a lot of organizations is to build these super, super complex systems that account for every little thing, but the systems are so hard to implement that no one ends up following them. So you have to be pragmatic in what you want to tackle. And, I wish that every system could be implemented by software, because then you could just design every little if then statement and it would run perfectly. But these are human beings that are implementing them, and they definitely can have failures. So for the scheduling confirmation protocol, basically we put a list of all of the stakeholders here, okay, which would be, your corporate entity, and then, by priority here, which patients obviously are the top priority, and then owner doctors, associate doctors, hygienists, assistants, fronts, and then answering service. So if you look at this, corporate, the system needs to be designed for 1,000 offices. It becomes unmanageable if you have one system for every office, and you get into a situation where you can't grow because you're just dealing with so many different permutations of whatever you're trying to do, in this case, scheduling. You want to reduce the one-offs, the exceptions to the rules, and you need it to be manageable because eventually there's going to be more than one front. So your office will be changing, your office staff will be changing, you'll have answering service staff that's changing, and you'll even have associate doctors that are changing out, or even owner doctors. So if you're not consistent, you're having to retrain every single person. And especially when you have two crews in the same office, or you have an answering service, if everyone's not on the same page, then there's a lot of confusion and it ends up being a lot of drama. Okay. You also need to remember that offices change. Some of them are starting up and they have a lot of availability, and then some of them are super established and they have too many patients and not enough time on the schedule. Okay. It also needs to maximize production. Okay. Obviously, every office needs to, make as much money as possible and utilize their staff and chairs and equipment as much as possible in order to make money. I'm going to add one here, which is that we need to deal with operatory constraints. Okay, so there's certain offices that have operatory constraints, and that could be a small office, but it could be a big office where there's just too many patients for the number of operatories. So that's another constraint there. Okay, it needs to reduce associate burnout. A lot of times associates leave because of two reasons: either they're not making enough money, or the office is too busy and they feel like they're rushed all of the time. So it needs to be a balancing act of busy enough and not too busy, okay? And it needs to accommodate the answering service. Again, like I said up here, it needs to accommodate other people coming in and scheduling on your schedule, or third-party applications that come in and schedule on your emergency or hygiene appointments. That could be ZocDoc, that could be just coming in through your website, that could be any of these other services that try to integrate to your patient management system and find available appointments, okay? What are the requirements on the patient side? Obviously, they want to be seen in a timely manner. If you are always scheduling patients out 3 to 4 weeks, or always telling patients that you have no availability, they're simply going to go somewhere else. So that's super important. When patients show up, they don't want to be waiting around in either the operatory or the waiting room. So important that your mechanism is, your scheduling mechanism or protocol adequately accounts for the time that existing patients are in the operatory, and an appointment really should be from the time that the patient walks in to the time that the patient, or till the time that the room is ready to go. So really, a lot of times where doctors are trying to condense appointment times, the problem is hey, have they accounted for the setup of the operatory, and have they accounted for the breakdown of the operatory? And then patients obviously want to feel like they have adequate time being spent with them by the providers or the assistants, or essentially just the staff. On the owner doctor side, obviously we want to be able to make money and to produce. Very, very important requirement. If a system is created that doesn't allow for high production, no owner doctor is going to sign up for it. And in reality, that's the big requirement, and unfortunately, owner doctors own that office, and no matter what scheduling protocol is there, if it's not able to help them make money and produce, they're not going to sign up for it. Okay. Part of that is the owner doctors do not want blocks on their schedule. Blocks represent dead time that they are losing money. If you consider an entire staff sitting around not doing anything, you can blow up a morning's worth of production or income just by some of those blocks. So super important. Owner doctors want to be able to run multiple columns. As they get more proficient, there's some doctors that can run 3, 4, even 5 operatories, maybe 6 with a hygienist. So you want to create some kind of a scheduling mechanism that can have multiple columns. They want hygienists to be able to easily pull cleanings to their side when a doctor cleaning drops off, or when one of the hygienist cleaning drops off. So that also needs to be addressed. How do we do that? If the doctor's cleanings are scheduled on the same time as the hygienist cleanings, for example, on the half an hour or on the hour, then one of the hygienist cleanings drops off. You just simply pull over the doctor cleaning, and then you can increase the hygienist utilization, hopefully to 100%, okay? Like we say, we want to increase that hygiene utilization, okay? A lot of that is on the confirmation side. Are we doing 4-week calls to clear off essentially bogus hygiene appointments, so that we can both increase the hygiene utilization, but also increase hygiene availability within the next 4 weeks, so that we can get new patients into hygienists instead of on the doctor side, okay? Because we really want patients to dictate their care, not pigeonhole them into either an up convert or a down convert as far as what the appointment is, just because we don't have time. Okay. I think one of the things that frustrates a lot of owner doctors is seeing 2 hours of nothing being done, and then all of a sudden 4 patients come in. Again, patient experience goes down just because if we would have had a scheduling mechanism that it would have made that schedule more uniform, those 4 patients would have been seen and given their adequate amount of time for their procedures. And it allows for up conversions of those procedures into more dentistry if that's what the patient wants. Okay. And then, obviously we need a mechanism to verify that everything's being done. There's a huge tendency by all staff and doctors that they just, systems break down. People don't do what they're supposed to do. And so if you let that happen, first thing that usually falls off is confirmation calls don't get done. And, immediately that's not a big, huge issue. But if you're ever wanting to add in more associates, or, if there's a slow month, you really wish that those mechanisms would have been in place so that you can maximize or reduce your no-shows, okay, which is what this next item is. We want a mechanism to keep flaky patients from consuming too much chair time. There's nothing worse than a flaky patient that you knew was flaky, but decides that they want to get an anterior 6. And let's say that you scheduled 2 hours for it, and you had other patients that were wanting to also get in, but you scheduled that flaky patient on your production schedule, and then they no-show, and then you're sitting around for 2 hours scrambling to figure out what to do to make money, when you could have simply just had a couple more of those patients from last week who wanted to get in on that time frame come in. So associate doctors, we want to be able to make money and to produce. They want a good flow. Associate doctors, they're usually people who they don't want too much work. A lot of associate doctors get stressed out when 5 columns are scheduled on them, but also they eventually get stressed out if they only have 1 column, because they simply can't make enough money with 1 column. And so that causes stress. So with associate doctors, it's kind of a balancing act on making sure that the flow is perfect for them. And, a lot of owner doctors try to will the associate doctors to do a schedule like they're doing. But what ends up happening is the associate doctors get too stressed out with such a busy schedule that they end up wanting to go to a slower practice. So owner doctors have to understand this. And I've gotten calls from a lot of associate doctors that they just really didn't like being overscheduled. And sometimes that's just, they were sitting around for 2 hours and then 5 patients showed up, or they are looking out a week in advance and they see a schedule with 3 patients at the same time or 2 root canals at the same time, and they want to quit because it just stresses them out too much. So we have to come up with a system that accommodates associate doctors and reduces the turnover of associate doctors. So again, they want to reduce stress by seeing too many patients at once, and they want an organized scheduling mechanism because something that's not organized stresses them out, okay? Hygienists, they want to be able to spend adequate time with patients. A big thing with hygienists is if you say, hey, I want you to complete an SRP, a full mouth SRP in an hour, they're going to stress out and they're going to kind of throw up the ethical dilemma is, hey, are we really serving our patients well? So, so hygienists also want a super organized scheduling mechanism. Some hygienists want accelerated hygiene. If they're on some kind of a bonus where they get a bonus for either production, collection, or the number of appointments that they see, some of them want accelerated, but some will quit if 2 patients show up at once. And some of them will even quit if a patient who is scheduled correctly shows up a half an hour early and the owner doctor's like, hey, can you just see this patient real quick, or can you get this patient going? And they'll just stress out and they'll want to quit. Again, from experience, this is kind of what I've seen. So what do assistants want? They also want to know what they are needing to set up for. Okay, so we try to keep the appointment types to a minimum, and it's a balancing act of basically the least common denominator of what the fronts need, what the assistants need, and what the doctors need. So having like 4 appointment types for basically the same setup becomes super confusing and super management intensive. So we've tried to reduce appointment types to the absolute minimum that we need, okay? They don't want to have confusion on what's happening today. You know, are our lab delivery cases super easy to identify? What exactly is going on? Are we doing fillings? Are we doing a crown? Which one are we doing first? Is the patient going to be numb coming out of the hygiene? Are they not? How do we take a patient from the hygiene to the doctor's side? How do we take the patient from the front into the clinic? How do we dismiss the patient? All of those things, super important, okay? And they want enough adequate time so that they're not rushed in setting up the room and breaking down the room, okay? So they definitely want a reasonable workload. Fronts, they want something that's organized. If you don't create a system that is documented, that is consistent, every new staff member gets stressed out about it. And a lot of times, if you can create something that's consistent, then the stress level goes down, and they essentially like to come in and just be like, yep, it's done the same way every single time. This is super important when you start getting more office staff in the same building, because if everyone's not on the same page, then it becomes a lot of drama. And a lot of new single doctors who have gone through, they're the only doctor in the office, to multiple doctors, start getting all of this drama pushback when that second crew is introduced, because they find out that if they don't create a consistent mechanism, they start getting a bunch of calls on their days off because one crew didn't do what the office was supposed to do. And then there's also all these meetings about what we should do. And then because it's not documented, then there's always follow-up questions and things like that. So younger doctors need to understand that as their organizations change, if you don't set up expectations when you're in the slow phase, when you get to the fast stage, it's going to be very difficult to manage, and it's so much harder to retrain people who have been doing something for a year versus telling them how to do it from day one, okay? I think with fronts, there's a huge tendency to not do confirmation calls. A lot of fronts, a lot of staff are like, hey, there's an automated system behind the scenes. I'm going to just go ahead and let that work. And that works kind of in a one doctor situation. The problem is when you go to that second doctor and you need production, every single patient that shows up is super important, okay? So you have to come up with a scheduling mechanism and a confirmation mechanism that brings in as many patients as possible, okay? The other thing too on a confirmation mechanism is the ability to clean out bogus appointments, okay? That's why physical confirmation calls are absolutely required if you want to grow your practice, okay? And fronts don't want to. A lot of doctors are like, I want my schedule to be absolutely perfect. I want root canal at 8:30. I want crown prep at 9:30. I want this at 10:30. And so what they'll do is they'll start putting in all of these blocks that people have to remove to pigeonhole patients into these particular appointments. The problem is again, like I discussed earlier, if you are becoming so upset with little changes that you create these super restrictive mechanisms, your patient flow will be reduced to the point that you can't make money. So I see this a lot of doctors wanting these super restrictive schedules, and it ends up killing your practice just because, first of all, it makes a ton of work for the fronts because every day you have to go in and create all of these blocks. And then second of all, what happens is then patients aren't able to be pigeonholed into it, and so your flow is just killed. So fronts, I think this is kind of a corporate thing too, that owner doctors sometimes go on to the extreme on pigeonholing patients into appointments. Okay. For the answering service, okay, they want organization. They don't want 15 different mechanisms across, 15 different offices, because eventually that gets into 1,000 different protocols over 1,000 different offices. So you have to have something that is consistent across all offices. And they also want to be able to get patients in according to patient needs. Okay, so for any answering service, usually it's after hours or when an office is closed. Patients are calling in for an emergency situation, and so they want to get in immediately. And so answering service is trying to accommodate those patients. And answering service are usually getting patients who are a little bit upset. So, they take a brunt of a lot of bad type of patients, or bad types of situations, I guess I should say, because just the nature of the times that they're taking those calls. So when you go through our scheduling mechanism, kind of look at all of the requirements here, and you'll notice that there's a checkoff list. Oh, that's what's being identified and addressed with this particular protocol or this particular item in the scheduling mechanism. So, just understand that, and you'll see that, and this is the scheduling mechanism that we've come up with in 2022. It could be different in 2023, depending on feedback from all of the stakeholders, and also and it might be that in 2023 we have gone too far and we're starting to restrict patient flow down because we want to address every single detail, whereas maybe sometimes we should just simply not address those details. So anyway, that is our scheduling protocol requirements.